Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman and we are back for UFC 268 edition of the Undisputed MMA show. And I'm joined this week by my good friend, our old friend, John Kelly. The reason why most of you guys are here every week, he missed UFC 267 last week, is back in the United States, is back on the show this week for a killer pay-per-view card. John, my friend, welcome back.
Thank you, bro. I definitely appreciate it. Appreciate all you guys. Excited to be back in the booth. We got a 3-person booth tonight with my guy TajikBay, which is the first time I believe either me and Jonah have been on a show with him. So super excited. The obvious Twitter MMA GOAT, as most people refer to him, the MMA betting GOAT. So Tajik, what's going on, man?
Not much. Jonas, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here.
We are certainly excited to have you, my man. We do have 14 fights to break down this weekend, so we'll get started here pretty quickly. But obviously, main event, before we get started, we'll just touch on it quickly. The rematch between Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington from December of 2019. They'll run it back this weekend in the main event. Co-main event, obviously a stack card here. We got Rose Namajunas and Zhang Weili running back their title fight from earlier this year. And then, of course, the people's main event, I guess we could say, if that's even possible with a stacked card, as we have Michael Chandler against Justin Gaethje in the pay-per-view main opener. But let's get started, guys, here at the bottom of the card. First fight of the evening, kicking things off at Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena. We got Osborne currently lined as a -185 favorite. He's $8.7 thousand on DraftKings. He takes on CJ Vergara, who makes his UFC debut here at the age of 30 years old. He's +170, $7.5 thousand. And John, my man, I will let you go first here. I saw you had a bet on the first fight of the evening, expecting a little bit of violence. Talk to me about how you're expecting this fight to play out.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be a running trend. I got a lot of bets for this card, so I'm super excited to talk through it with you guys. This one, honestly, is just, I think it's a good violent spot. Osborne is, I think me and Jonah, I think we've talked about this in previous Osborne fights, where he's kind of one of those under machines that we like to target, where he's typically looking to finish the fight early, but he's also not super talented and tends to get finished early as well. So I basically think any under spot in most matchups with Osborne is probably a good look. And this one's no different. Carlos Vergara is a guy who I actually bet against on Dana White Contender Series. He ended up proving me wrong. But, you know, he's still a guy that went like life or death with Jacob Silva, got dropped multiple times in that fight. Like, he's kind of a punching bag on the feet. And yeah, he does have some power, but he eats a lot of clean shots. I think Osborne is explosive, especially early in the fight, might be able to drop him early. I think Osborne is probably the better grappler as well. Vergara struggled defensively in terms of the grappling, even on the regional scene. So this is one where I just, like I said, I think it's a good violent spot. Any unders are good. I think knockout in round 1 for Osborne is probably a decent look as well. I saw +700 on FanDuel. I didn't bet that myself, though. I went with fight doesn't start round 2 at +230. I just think it's a spot where this should not be above +200. When you look at Osborne, his last 8 fights have all ended inside the first round. And like I said, Vergara is typically more of a finisher as well. His last 5 wins have come by knockout. So I think we could see this one end early, and at +230, I think there's a little bit of value on that.
Yeah, I've seen a few people on that under. I may have an opinion on it myself that we'll get to in a second here, but Tajik, I'll kick it over to you. You know, the under has taken some money throughout the week, but the side that's really taken the most money in terms of the market is Osborne. He was at -150, -165 coming into fight week. He's now upwards of -190 in some places. So certainly a lot of money has come in on Osborne. Are you kind of seeing it the same way, agreeing with the market on that side?
No, I think market is wrong. I think you know, to bet Ode, I think would be a little bit tough, just because we don't know what Ode will show up, and I don't think Ode himself knows which Ode will show up. We just haven't seen him consistently performing, you know, at least two rounds. You know, the last time he went to a decision was back in like 2016. So he either submits you or gets submitted. He gets KO'd or KOs you. With the CJ, the thing about it is that although he gets rocked and wobbled, you know, he has never been stopped by KO or TKO. He has only been submitted once. And I think what's important factor here is the CJ's ability to recover. If you watch the Correa fights and other fights, I mean, he gets clipped, but he gets up all the time. and he doesn't back down. His power is there throughout the entire performances, and most of his stoppages came in the second and the third rounds. So this is what's going to happen. Ode is very athletic. I think he's going to push in the beginning, maybe rock and wobble CJ, but CJ is going to persevere, and somewhere towards the second or third round, he's going to go ahead and stop Ode. And the bet I like here is CJ Vergara by TKO in the second or the third round, whichever. So you can I think bet him inside the distance, and there's definitely a value side there, especially with the market moving towards Ode this much.
Yeah, I'll agree with that in terms of how I expect the fight to play out. I think I might give Ode a little bit more credence early on. He is athletic, has reach advantage here. He's a dynamic striker. I don't know if he's particularly good at either striking or grappling, but he's certainly someone who uses his aggressiveness in a way that I think will allow him to win more fights than maybe his skill level generally would if he was a more tepid fighter. The bet I placed here is I played under 2.5 rounds. I played it at -130. That was available at BetMGM. Some big offshores have the number as well. Should be pretty widely available. I played it within the last hour or so. I played that for a unit and a half. And, John mostly touched on the under here. Ode has not been to a second round in quite a long time. Tajik touched on it here. Ode's a guy who, if he doesn't knock you out, he's probably getting knocked out. If he doesn't submit you, he's probably getting submitted the other way. So I kind of just see it as, Ode, I expect to be the more athletic guy early on, kind of the more dynamic striker. We have seen CJ been hurt before. So I'm not sure I expect him to weather the storm, but if he does, I expect him to be live for a finish in his own right on the comeback in rounds 2 and round 3. So I think kind of a general consensus here is that it's likely to be Ode pretty early in the first round, should have a chance to get the fight finished. But if not, I do think it's possible that the underdog looks live in this spot. Let's move on to the second fight of the night. We've got Melzik Bugsdarian. He's a -335 favorite at this point. He is $9,200 on DraftKings against Bruno Silva, who's making Bruno Souza, I should say, making his UFC debut, +275, 7K for the Brazilian newcomer in this spot. And Tajik, I'll let you go first here. Melzik's a guy, came into the UFC, very dynamic striker, right? Guy who has a lot of power in his hands. He throws decent kicks as well. Facing a guy in Bruno Souza, who to me looks like he's more of a kickboxer as well in his own right, not likely to take the fight to the ground here. So I'm expecting a stand-up affair. Are you expecting kind of the fight to play out mostly on the feet here as well?
Mostly on the feet, but it can get tricky. Why? Because Melzik's takedown defense is a liability. It's a huge liability. If you watch the Colin Anglin fight, Colin was almost outside the cage, mile away, and he took him down. He wasn't even low on his leg, but that double went through, and Melzik just went down so easily. I'm not saying that Bruno is the guy who's going to take him down and dominate him, but with such liability, his only path to victory resides in the first round KO. And most of his finishes came through a first round KOs, which validates the point. So he's going to go hard, and he's going to go all out very early. In his second and third round, he slows down, and so if you push the pace a little bit on him, I think Bruno can make it very competitive. So I disagree with the market here yet again, but at the same time, to get Bruno, we know that a newcomer, on a short notice is a recipe for a disaster. And so my take is going to be here something that I think it's an interesting take. I think this fight is going to be a draw. And I'm going to bet this fight at draw. I think it's going to be a majority of split draw. 29-28 Melzik, 28-28 in other judges. And I'm going to be betting this fight by draw by draw at +5,000 on any bookie there is.
Yeah, the draw is usually kind of uniformly priced at +5,000 across the board.
Some actually, I think offshores give it for 8,000, but yeah, I think it's an interesting take, because Melzik is going to come down, and probably if he rocks and wobbles him and gets a 10-8 round, and then Bruno recovers in the second and third, he can get those rounds, and we could easily see 28-28 type of draw.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Obviously, shop around all your books of as many outs as possible, get the best possible price. Even when we're betting something in the +5,000, +8,000, that's a big difference, despite the fact that both are kind of long shot odds. So, John, Tajik just came on. I think he called the first ever draw in the history of our show. We've been doing this for like over a year. I think it's the first ever draw prediction. So we'll make a deal right now, Tajik. If that finishes in a draw, we've been trying to mix in different guests for every pay-per-view. You can come on as many pay-per-views as you want if you hit a draw of +5,000 here for the people. John, I know you also have a bet in this fight. I believe you are on something inside the distance here for Melsik. Talk to the people about your play, because between me and you, and I guess between the viewers now, you thought that the Melsik Bugsdarian fight versus Colin England was a contender series bout earlier this year. When we were talking earlier in the week, it was not, but it kind of plays out at a contender series level fight, right? Like England takes him down with a very kind of not even a well set up takedown, and then Melsik just kind of melts him on the feet. So certainly was kind of a discrepancy in styles in that fight. What do you think of this matchup with Melsik? It's like minus 335. Seems like a big price tag, at least on the money line.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, thank you for clarifying that it wasn't technically a contender series level fight, but I mean, was it really? Like, it pretty much was. Like, they both fought on contender series previously. I think England was on short notice or something like that. I think when they squared up, but yeah, awesome KO by Melsik. Melsik's a super dangerous striker. I agree with some of the points that Tajik brought up where, obviously Melsik comes on very strong in the first round. Nobody's denying that. And then the cardio tends to fade. But I do give him a little bit more credit, whereas I think the knockout is still likely in round 2. I think it's really round 3 where the cardio really starts to crater off. So I actually think Melsik by knockout is the most likely outcome. That's what I played at plus 210. There's been a little bit of movement on that. I see some plus 150s out there for the most part. But FanDuel did open up at plus 210. I think there was a decent amount of value there if you were able to get it. But he's just one of the better strikers in terms of like these not low level, but these up and coming prospects that don't have a lot of experience. Like, his striking is for real. And I know the cardio is a concern. The defensive grappling is a concern. The takedown defense is a concern. And all of those things make him probably a prime candidate to fade moving forward if we see the market continue to give him minus 300 level respect. But I just don't think Bruno Souza is the guy that has those skill sets to be the one to fade Melsik with. So I think Melsik probably melts him in the first or second round. So Melsik by knockout plus 210 for a unit on FanDuel is the way I played it. I would not be betting him at the money line. Even though I think he probably dominates here, that's just like there's multiple fights on this card where it's just, I mean, way too much respect for guys that have little to no UFC experience. And there's a couple other spots that we'll talk about that later. But yeah, Melsik by KO. Melsik is coming.
Yeah, I think that we're kind of all in consensus here. The money line is certainly wide at over 75% implied. I do think that you got it in pretty good in terms of the value at plus 210 for a knockout. Certainly some closing line value coming in your direction, John. I have no action on the fight. I think that Melsik is probably someone I'll be looking to fade throughout the beginning of his UFC career, at least. Kind of just the prototype of a striker with big power who slows down and can't defend takedowns is someone who I kind of always want to fade. My issue is with Souza, he's just kind of a tepid kickboxer a little bit. I haven't seen him kind of dedicate himself to a wrestling heavy approach in too many of his fights. And I'm also a little bit concerned, not necessarily about his durability, but he does throw naked kicks. We've seen him drop before prior to the UFC. He'll kind of throw naked kicks with his hands down and is wide open to counter. So I certainly would not be shocked if Melsik catches a body early on Saturday night, but certainly a fade candidate moving forward. No action for me, however, on his second UFC fight. Third fight of the evening, we got Justin Jacoby here as a minus 400 favorite taking the fight on short notice. He's $9.6 thousand on DraftKings against Jon Alon, who comes back plus 300 for Jon Alon. He's 7.8K on DK. He was originally slated to fight this week against a different opponent. He was supposed to fight Alexa Kamor, who pulled out of the fight. Jacoby steps in here, I believe, is on 5 days' notice. Still, minus 400 price tag certainly seems lofty, but honestly, I think this price is somewhat close to correct. With Jon Alon, this is a guy, winless in the UFC. I think he really struggles to compete in the striking against his UFC level fighters, at least on the feet. His takedowns are decent, and we have seen Dustin Jacoby taken down. I believe his takedown defense is like a 58%. But the one thing I will say about Dustin Jacoby is his get-up game is extremely strong. He was taken down, I think, 9 times by Iaquinta, was on his back for less than 5 minutes in that fight. Was taken down twice by Darren Stewart, albeit a rock Darren Stewart at points in that fight, but he still kind of came back. and was able to land, a lot of damage. This is a guy who's a really complete kickboxer for MMA, right? Like has a kickboxing background, lands leg kicks. I think he'll be able to do a lot of damage on the feet. Can I lay minus 400 on a guy with a 58% takedown defense against the grappling specialist? Probably not, but I do kind of just expect Jacoby to be able to go out there and kind of dissect Alon on the feet. So I'll pick him minus 400. I guess if you're a parlay guy looking to throw a quote unquote safe play this weekend in a money line parlay, I don't hate it, but not a fight where I have a ton of opinions on in terms of the money line. Tajik, anything for you? It's going to be hard to follow up a plus 5,000 draw call, but anything for you here in the third fight of the night?
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be very, very tough. I think it's going to be tougher to bet Jacoby under the spot, being on a short notice and at minus 400. The thing about it is that he has to understand, and I think he does, that Alon is very durable. He has never been stopped by TKO or KO. I think he has only been submitted once, and so for Jacoby coming in, I think if he keeps it comfortably on the distance, he can piece him out and win a comfortable decision. I wouldn't have a problem with Jacoby going in and charging in and trying to stop Alon. I think he has to be very smart about it and just basically cruise to a comfortable, unanimous decision. It depends on which path he takes. I hope he does the right thing. I after such a long career, I would like to see him finally succeed. Crack into top 15 in the UFC and test himself out genuinely. And so for Alon. Dolidze got out volumed Alon. I mean, what else do we have to say here? In every single fight, he got out volumed standing up. And to get, I think it's a very big red flag, to get, outstruck by Dolidze. So I'm going to pick Dustin Jacoby here, and I hope he does the right thing and takes this one. And my official prediction is going to be Dustin Jacoby by decision.
You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted for a second. Tajik picks a decision. I kind of agree with that take that if he charges at Alon, I don't know if he'll see trouble, but it's a tough guy to put away. John, that kind of brings us to the DraftKings discussion. Of course, you can add anything regarding the betting markets, but Dustin Jacoby being a short notice fighter, his salary comes out after the slate has already been posted. He's the most expensive fighter on the UFC 268 slate at $9.6 thousand. Certainly feels like an expensive price to pay for a guy who may kind of be content to just throw a kickboxing match and be able to win kind of a unanimous 30-27. What do you think about this fight from a DraftKings perspective? And then, of course, your thoughts on the money line as well.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty easy fade in terms of DraftKings. Jacoby, like you said, not really known as a finisher, technical kickboxer, but not a ton of power, more of a leg kicker. And we've seen him kind of coast his way to a decision in the past. And it's not that Alon is all that good, but I don't know. I'd be kind of surprised if we see at least the finish in the first round, and that's what Jacoby needs in order to pay off that salary on such a full slate where we have a ton of options, a ton of good fights to target. This one's just not one of them. And I really don't even have that much to add to your guys' points. You guys broke it down pretty well. The Kamer matchup was certainly a more winnable one for Alon, where he had a real path to victory that involved wrestling and takedowns. And sure, he kind of lands takedowns in some of his fights, but you mentioned it against Cutelaba. Like, good luck holding Jacoby down. Like, Cutelaba couldn't even hold him down. And even after taking him down that many times, Jacoby kept working back to his feet. And then obviously Cutelaba gassed and Jacoby took over. Like, I just don't even really see a path to victory for Alon here. So I think Jacoby by decision, and it's probably just a fade in terms of DraftKings all around.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Kind of sounds like we're all on the same page here. Let's move on to a fight that has certainly caught the attention of the masses this weekend. We go to the heavyweight division. We got Jon Villante taking on Chris Barnett. The current betting odds have Villante as a minus 130 favorite. He's the cheaper fighter on DraftKings. We'll note that off the bat. He's $7.9 thousand against Barnett. Comes back betting underdog plus 110. However, is $8.3 thousand on DK. This is actually a spot that I got involved in. Oftentimes I'm not one to get involved on heavyweight matchups, especially ones at the lower level, but I saw a plus number next to Jon Villante's name earlier this week. I got plus 100, which was actually not the best on the market. So shout out to the people who got in at like plus 115, I think was out there on Villante last week. I just hadn't pulled the trigger yet. I did bet Villante here. I kind of just think he has Barnett covered everywhere, man. Like, if we just kind of look at the market in terms of how they viewed these guys, obviously Villante last two fights comes out and kind of gets submitted due to exhaustion in an embarrassing fashion against Maurice Green, then gets out volume by Jake Collier his last fight. But if we look at the betting market, man, like Villante was a minus 200 favorite almost against Collier in his last time out. But of course, the market doesn't mean everything, right? Like he clearly lost the fight. And I think that win has kind of, or that loss, I should say, has aged well. Like I think Collier has kind of gained a little bit of respect. He's a decent volume striker at heavyweight. He's never going to be a world title challenger, but he's kind of around the lower levels of heavyweight. He can certainly compete. And I just kind of think that Villante has Barnett kind of outgunned everywhere. Barnett came in short notice against Ben Rothwell and was like a plus 300 underdog and looked pretty much every bit of it. Super undersized for the heavyweight division. I think Villante is a better striker than him. I think he probably has better cardio, although that's not something I'm banking on coming into the week. And mostly, I think he has a grappling advantage. You know, I'm not convinced that Gian Villante is going to come in with the most plus EV game plan in the world, shooting takedowns off the bat here. But I did bet him for a unit and a quarter at plus 100. It was a bigger edge than that in terms of like how I would normally bet it, but I tried to tone down the unit sizing a little bit due to the nature of the fight. And obviously, since I made the bet, Tajik, I'll kick it over to you here. Gian Villante announces his retirement. Will be coming after this fight. Never a great feeling after betting someone to see that, but I kind of just think he has Barnett everywhere here. But Tajik, my man, am I crazy for getting involved on this mess of a heavyweight fight?
Yes, I think you're crazy to get involved, and it's a little bit so. I do not put much, stock into, Villante saying that he's retiring. To be honest with you, we've heard this before, like when Matt Brown came out and said I retired, and then it took him one win, and then suddenly, he wants to become a champion again. So I think with Villante, it's a bit similar situation. I mean, if anything. It's hard to cap, when somebody says like I'm retiring. In women's MMA, it's a little bit more precise. Like Roxy says I'm retiring, you understand. Like you bet against her like the whole time, and so I would say it's a close fight. I think what Villante has to do is to time the uppercuts well, because that's what Rothwell did well. He tried to get his timing and then what he did was he was able to do that, get the Barnett's timing, and then just I think those uppercut shots were lethal, and that's where kind of and Barnett did not want to do much with in this fight, So Barnett's shot in terms of stopping Villante is going to be in the first round. I think that's his best shot after the first round. I don't see him stopping Villante. And then the third round, I think they're not going to have a cardio, either of them, for a third round. I mean, they're just going to be exhausted, and it's going to be, a very sloppy fight. So I think Villante has a chance to stop Barnett later. If he I think he's durable enough to withstand Barnett's barrage. But Barnett hits very well. He found the chin of Rothwell on a couple of occasions. I just don't think that Villante is going to be a chin is a liability. He lost only twice, got stopped only twice in his entire career, and he had a pretty long career. So, but yeah, if his heart is not there, though, he probably gonna bet against himself, and is gonna fall in whichever round he picked. So we'll see what happens. I'm very torn, to be honest with you, to make a prediction in this fight, and that mind you, betting but I would say Jon Villante by decision. That's probably what I would leave it, but I don't have interest in betting this fight.
Yes, certainly I think a consensus opinion kind of from the majority this weekend there from you. Tajik, I will note that at the current market prices, I don't think Villante at minus 130, with kind of how the week has played out, I don't think he's necessarily worth a bet anymore. At plus 100, I thought it was worth betting a little bit, but at this point, I think it's probably a comfortable pass at the current betting odds. John, we have a comment from friend of the show, Matt. He says fight ends by heart attack minus 275. If they get out of round 2, the live line on that might be like minus 1,000. It might still have value. But in all seriousness here, John, something that Tajik mentioned that I want to get your take on is kind of the size discrepancy here, because Villante has a 6-inch height advantage. He should be kind of the taller man by a considerable amount, but he's also not a natural heavyweight. And Chris Barnett is like as a natural heavyweight as you can get. So I think it's kind of interesting. It's kind of size in terms of height versus size in terms of the weight they're carrying into the cage. What do you make of the matchup this weekend and kind of how the size difference will play into it?
Yeah, size is always a funny topic because, somebody might be bigger or longer and have a huge reach advantage. But if they don't have the skills to use that advantage, it's really meaningless. Like we talked about that in the Bea Malecki fight the last time she fought. And like you saw, like 9-inch reach advantage or whatever she had. It just didn't matter. So I tend to agree with Jonah in that I think John Villante is probably the more skilled fighter everywhere. But with all the question marks surrounding him, like, I'm not looking to lay juice with Villante. Like, if you got on him early, like, I considered betting him when I broke down the fight. I think it was right at a pick, and I considered it, but I have a lot of action on this card. I didn't feel the need to force it on a fight where I agree with Tajik. Outside of like an early meme finish, I think we see a sloppy decision. So I'm not really looking to bet on a guy who literally gave up in a fight that he was winning against Maurice Green. Even though I think he's probably the better fighter everywhere. So yeah, I'm just not going to spend too much time on it. In terms of DraftKings, I will say this one kind of has a wide range of outcomes in that, you know, yes, I'm probably lean with Tajik. I think it's a sloppy decision, but I'm also not ruling out the fact that either guy could probably, you know, finish with some sort of meme style finish early in the fight. And in that scenario, they're both cheap enough to where a first round finish is obviously going to be a pretty strong case for the optimal. So I'm not going to fade it completely. And I don't think it's going to be super owned on DraftKings as well.
Yeah, and as Uncle Wheezy put it in the live YouTube chat, this fight is a dumpster fire. It certainly is. We may have spent too much time on it. Hopefully my bet cashes. I saw someone comment, like, I need to bet on every fight since I'm going to be at the event in New York this weekend. I think having multiple, a unit and a quarter on John Villante will be enough of a sweat for me to get through that I don't need to degenerate on every single play. Let's move on to the next fight here. We got a pretty highly regarded prospect, at least by the market here, coming over from Cage Warriors. About Ian Gary. He's currently minus 400 at $9.5 thousand on DK. He takes on Jordan Williams, who's coming off consecutive losses to begin his UFC career after a Contender Series victory. Williams is plus 300 as an underdog here. He's $6.7 thousand on DK. Tajik, I will kick this one over to you first. Kind of looks to me like Jordan Williams' best moment might have come on Contender Series knockout over Gregory Rodriguez RoboCop. That is aged pretty damn well, I would say, since it happened. But since then, he's lost consecutive fights. Ian Gary certainly has a lot of hype coming behind him. He's 23 years old, Irish prospect. Do you think Gary's the truth here? And even if he isn't, is this a spot where you kind of just think he's able to roll?
I think he's able to roll. I like his wrestling. You know, I think he can take Jordan down, and Jordan has shown that he guesses out. I mean, he has this weird, like, I think it's a Gracie Barra tattoo, and I don't understand why he has it, because his grappling is very subpar. And I said this before, like, Imavov almost submitted him, so it's like, it's really puzzling to me. Like, I don't know his grappling credentials, but I don't think he should have this tattoo, like, to be honest with you. And it's I think what I don't like about Gary is that he tends to keep his hands pretty low. Like, he's so relaxed, you know, and I don't like this, especially if you're an up and coming fighter, if you're, you know, this promising star. Keep your hands up. I mean, if anything, the fight with Burlinson fight last week showed us that you better keep your hands up, you know. So I hope he does. I hope he learns. I like the submission lineup here. I attacked it earlier, so the odds were pretty good. I think it's you know, I think a lot of people, I think there is a value on this side, and so my official prediction is also will be the same. I think he submits him, so that's Ian Gary by submission.
Yeah, I see a plus 550 on submission on FanDuel currently, plus 600 at Bet Rivers in terms of the legal U.S. books, currently best market prices. John, anything for you here with Ian Gary as a massive favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is clearly a showcase fight for Ian Gary. Obviously, they want to build this dude up. Fought over in, what was it, Cage Warriors. He was the champ over there. Does have a decent following. Like, Jordan Williams, like you said, like, he looked good on Contender Series, had that big moment. But I think we've kind of seen by now that, like, I'm not even sure if he should be at this level. Like, yes, he does have a little bit of power. You mentioned the defensive grappling concerns, the cardio concerns as well. And this one's at 170, right? Like, he's no longer fighting at 185. So, I mean, I think that's the right weight class for him, but I also just don't think he's very good. And on the flip side, like we talked about it earlier, this is a ton of market respect for a UFC newcomer with not a ton of experience. Like, I have no interest in betting Ian Gary at minus 400, no interest in parlaying him. Shout out to our boys, Martian and, Aussie, yeah, in the Discord, they refer to these times as the juice era. So maybe this is the juice era, and you parlay Gary and Melsick and you move on, but that's not my style. And I'm probably just gonna pass on this one. I would agree that Gary by submission is probably the only look that I'd even consider here, but no bet for me.
Yeah, so I actually considered laying the chalk with Gary at minus 300 when he opened there on BetMGM. I ultimately passed. I was in a similar spot last week with Albert Jurayev, who opened minus 300. He closed in the minus 400 range, and I thought he looked like a bright prospect. I had high hopes for him. Obviously, the fight didn't really play out in a fashion where he looked minus 400. So I think in cases where I'm not like super convinced at a 3-to-1 price, it's just best to pass. So I do think there was early value on Gary, despite the fact that he's a UFC newcomer, but I'm kind of happy just to not force things, stay back here. I do think he rolls. Jordan Williams, John, you mentioned this fight is at 170. Basically, he's a diabetic who couldn't cut weight, so he was fighting at his natural weight class of 185, but was extremely small there. However, now he's moved down in weight. He's cutting weight, hopefully properly, but it looks like he doesn't have the same durability. Not that he was ever super durable at 170 that he once did at 185. So I expect Gary to roll here. I think he's the better grappler. I think he's the better striker. The only thing that I think would kind of lead to him losing this fight is what Tajik mentioned, right? Like fights with his hands down a little bit, has kind of weird posture when defense strikes, may come back to bite him at some point. I do not think this is a spot. And I actually think that Gary's a pretty decent prospect. Minus 400 in his debut. We may not get any bettable lines soon, but this is a guy who I expect to have some success in the UFC, only 23 years old. I do expect him to rack up some wins before it's all said and done. Let's move on to the next matchup here. And this is an interesting one between Nasruddin and Imavov, who's a minus 130 favorite currently, and Edmund Shahbazyan plus 110 for Shahbazyan. The DK prices here, Imavov 8.5K, Shahbazyan is 7.7K. We have on the ticker currently that Imavov minus 115, Shahbazyan minus 105. It kind of just depends where you look at this point, because this is a line that has kind of taken a lot of money in each direction. It appears throughout fight week, has been bouncing back a little bit. Edmund Shahbazyan opened close to plus 150. I know some people who got him in that range. Congrats to them. Obviously, this fight is now projected to be a lot closer than that, but it kind of seems like the price on Shahbazyan hit its floor, and then Imavov started taking some money back the other way. So certainly a fight, but there seems to be two-way action. John, we've seen Shahbazyan come in after a quick to the UFC. Everyone was talking, oh, this guy could be the youngest champion ever, and he has really struggled his last 2 times out. Obviously, the Derek Brunson fight comes to mind as well, but this is a guy who had high hopes eventually, has kind of been exposed. Cardio certainly. What do you make of him here as a short underdog to Imavov?
Yeah, he's another Glendale Fight Club guy. So we talked about it with Melsick, like a lot of the same concerns where he's explosive, he's powerful in the first round, but the cardio really kind of falls off the cliff, and he's shown that he could be taken down and controlled against anybody with a competent wrestling game. So it was actually funny. I thought I was going to be on Shahbazyan here as a dog. I think FanDuel, you said plus 150, but I think FanDuel was like plus 136 on the open. And I think I even put it in one of the Discords we're in last month or whenever it opened. And I was like, oh, Edmund, a dog against Imavov. That's interesting. But the more I actually looked into the matchup, the more I kind of cooled off on Shahbazyan. Why would I bet Shahbazyan at the money line when I think almost all of his win condition probably comes in the first round or just comes by knockout. So I think either of those are probably stronger than the money line. But Imavov has shown to be pretty durable. He's a good striker. He's not a bad grappler. I just think this fight's probably going to play out on the feet either way. And I favor the striking of Imavov. So I think it's lined about right. I'm showing a little bit of value on Imavov, but I don't think it's going to get to a playable line for me. But I'd say Imavov by decision in a fight that he probably clearly takes over as the fight goes on.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how most people are seeing it in terms of the cardio dynamic. Potentially Shahbazyan early, Imavov takes over late. So no action from you, John. Tajik, you have anything here on this prelim bout?
I'm not interested in this fight from betting perspective. From a Draftkings, I think maybe Shahbazyan could be interesting at 7,700. But I like Imavov in the fact that his output, he puts more volume striking wise, and then in terms of he's defensively more sound. And then Shahbazyan has a low output and his grappling and wrestling is a liability. I think his cardio actually is okay, and for the round or two, actually his get-up game against Hermansen, I mean, looked pretty serviceable. So with Imamov, I think he can strike, and if he gets outstruck, I think what he can do, he can try to control and take down Shahbazyan. I don't think he's going to be overly successful to infinitely control Shahbazyan, but I think it would be enough to kind of maybe take a break and to make it look like he's having this advantage in the control advantage. I don't know which way to bet here, because it's I think to me it's more of a 50-50 fight. I don't know which way it's going to go. Probably Imavov by decision, but I could totally see him going either way. So that I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think my overarching thesis here is that it's pretty close to 50-50 as well. I wish I had bet Shahbazyan at some of the earlier prices. I think those who did, the market agrees with them, and I agree with them as well. I think those were good spots. Kind of torn on how this fight plays out. I think that something that Tajik mentioned that I actually wrote up for my DFS targets over on FTN Daily just came out, I think 37 minutes ago. It's free over there. I wrote up 3 players, one at each price range, above 9K, between 7 and 8K, and then someone below 8K, or between 8 and 9K, and then someone below 8K. Each week I wrote up 3 fighters, and I wrote up Edmund Shahbazyan this weekend as my cheap fighter to target on DraftKings. And the reasoning for that is when we have 14 fight slates, we saw a 15 fight slate last weekend on DraftKings. It's not going to be enough to just have 6 fighters who win in your lineup. You might min cash a GPP, but you're going to need 6 ceiling performances, 6 guys who go out there and put up 90, 100 points under the salary cap, obviously. And the thing about Edmund Shahbazyan that we could say throughout this point in his UFC career is he's very much an early fast starter and has power to get guys out of there early. And we talk about DraftKings in terms of what scores well traditionally is grapplers, right? Takedowns, control time. That's the easiest way to rack up consistent points. But the part of DFS that the strongest correlation to a ceiling score for somebody on DraftKings MMA is obviously a first round finish, right? You get a knockdown, which is 10 points, the 90-point bonus for a first round finish. Edmund Shahbazyan, of course, his last 2 fights, he's looked a little bit sketchy, albeit I will say against very strong competition in terms of those looking at the betting odds here. But something we've seen in all of his DraftKings wins, or all of his wins, I should say, is 95 plus DraftKings points. I think this is a guy with a very narrow path to victory, and the market is telling us he has almost a 50% chance to win the fight. I think at least 30% of that comes via early finishes here. So I'll have a lot of Shahbazyan on DraftKings. I don't have a bet on the fight. I guess I'll pick Imavov. I just think he's a little bit more well-rounded of a fighter right now, but certainly not sold on him being some like future top 10 guy. And I do think that Shahbazyan is fairly skilled despite the struggles he's had against elite competition. So Shahbazyan for me, overweight stance on DraftKings, but no action in terms of the betting market.
Before we move on, I was just going to plug, it seems like we're all kind of on the same page. Shahbazyan has, his win condition is early. Outside of that, we kind of think Imavov maybe takes over to a decision. I think Imavov by decision might be worth a poke. After talking to you guys, I think it was like plus 380 on FanDuel. That's a pretty decent number. And even fight goes to decision was like plus 156 or something like that. Like that seems like there could be some value there outside of an Edmund finish. I think that's kind of all you're fading to get to those 2 outcomes. So I just wanted to plug that before we move on.
Yeah, and that's the best available price currently on the market is plus 380 for Imavov by decision in this matchup. One other thing that I wanted to quickly touch on before we moved on, and I might have lost it, so we could maybe come back to it, loop around a little bit later, but I do kind of agree. Imavov may be a live betting opportunity, right? I don't think I'll be live betting this weekend, but if consensus is that, hey, the way he's probably going to lose is in the first round, and if not, he should take over down the stretch. Imavov, not a guy who I'm totally sold on cardiovascularly wise, but I do think that he makes for a live betting opportunity if he's an underdog after the first round here. So I think that's interesting. All right, let's move on to the Phil Haws versus Chris Curtis fight. This was a fight that the UFC tried to make on super short notice a few weeks ago. Sounded like Phil Haws didn't want to take the fight on 24 hours notice. Fell through, but Chris Curtis gets his break here. He enters the UFC. He's a plus 255 underdog, 6.8K here. Phil Haws minus 305. $9.4 thousand for Phil Haws, Phil Haws is someone who I think the MMA community kind of had high hopes for a while and then was exposed a little bit in terms of his cardio at the beginning of his career. But look, he entered the UFC. So there were some durability issues, some cardio issues, gets an 18-second knockout over Jacob Malkoun and then wins back-to-back decisions, which is not something that I think a lot of people expected from this guy when he first entered the UFC. But he's a minus 300 favorite here over the newcomer in Chris Curtis. Talk to me, Tajik. Any action from you here? Phil Haws has shown a little bit more to his game than I think I originally gave him credit for, but potentially still a flawed fighter at minus 300.
Yeah, no, I'm not betting Phil Haws this week. But at the same time, I'm the guy who bet like Mahishat by decision last week, and I'm not betting Curtis this week. It's just it's impossible. I think standing up he's okay, but he's very he's low output. I think he's just striking is okay, but I think Phil Haws is gonna take him down, and I think he's gonna push the pace. And I don't know if he finishes him, but I think it could be a little bit more competitive than the odds suggest. And I think Phil Haws takes this one by decision, but I don't have an action here. If anything, maybe Haws inside the distance could be inside the distance could be a value, but just in general, I don't think we're at the point where betting Phil Haws is wise, and so it's a pass for me. And my official pick is going to be Phil Haws by decision.
Yeah, I think I agree that, Phil Haws has shown me a little bit. I still think he may be a fade plant down the road. Not sure if this is the spot to do so. John, any action from you here in Haws versus Curtis?
No action for me. I'm on the same page as you guys. I favor Phil Haws here. A lot of what Chris Curtis does well, Phil Haws does well as well. So outside of like the cardio, because I think Curtis has a clear advantage there. Like I'm not going to say that Haws, like obviously his cardio was improved against Kyle Dawkins, got the decision win, looked good. But I'm also not ready to be like, oh, well, cardio is not a problem anymore for him. Like it's still a concern. It's still in the back of my mind. But I just think in this matchup, he probably gets it done either way. More powerful guy. He has upside to finish in the first round by knockout. But also, I think he probably just does enough in the first 2 rounds to where even if the cardio does kind of start to fade, he's probably up 2 rounds here. I think Chris Curtis is a good fighter, though. So like Tajik said, I think it could play out a little bit closer than the odds suggest, but I'd be looking at Curtis in a different style of matchup. This is just a really tough spot for him. So I like Phil Haws as well. No bet for me because, he's juiced to the tits, so you can't play this line.
Yeah, so for me, I think if anything, a live spot maybe on Chris Curtis, but not something that I'm like super passionate about getting it in on in the middle of this fight. I kind of agree with you, John. Like, I'd prefer to just take a little bit of data from this fight, potentially use it to fade Haws down the line, buy low on Chris Curtis, who's going to be 35 years old, potentially 0-1 in the UFC, multiple losses to high-profile opponents in PFL. Like, I do think that eventually there may be a time to buy on Chris Curtis. I just don't know if it's this weekend, but he does have a full or close to a full fight camp here, making his UFC debut, so that at least is encouraging compared to what we thought we might have on that 24-hour notice fight just a few weeks ago. Let's move on to what I believe is the second to last prelim here for UFC 268. We got Bobby Green, minus 180, 8.6K against Raging Ally Iaquinta, who comes back, making his return to the cage after a few years away, a couple of real estate sales. He's plus 155, $7,600 on DraftKings. I'll go first here. No action for me currently. I think that Bobby Green kind of is someone who I don't want to say hasn't gotten a fair shake in the UFC, but if you've listened to our show before, Bobby Green is obviously someone that I'm usually higher on the market on. His striking metrics checkout is pretty elite. This is a guy who is super tough to outstrike, and I think part of that is because he throws a little bit of what we would call like empty volume, right? He's certainly not a finisher, John. I know you'll touch on that as you always do in every Bobby Green fight, but in terms of the volume, he outstruck Rafael Fiziev in terms of the numbers, but was really getting hit with the more powerful shot, clearly lost the fight. But Bobby Green is someone who historically tough to take down, tough to hold down, tough to outstrike, and has the ability to take you down. I kind of think he's just perpetually underrated in the market. And then Ally Iaquinta, we haven't seen this guy, and I think it's going to be about 25 months by the time they step in the cage on Saturday night. I don't really know what to expect for Al. It's clear that he had a serious injury when he was outside of the cage. And he's also obviously got a lot else going on with his life. I'm not really sure what to expect from Al. It's tough to lay a price like minus 180 on Bobby Green, as much as I love the guy, just because his fights sometimes play out a lot closer than they probably should. But I kind of just think in the boxing, he has Iaquinta covered pretty well. So I'll pick Bobby Green. I think it's most likely by decision. One thing that I will say in terms of the decision, I don't want to steal anyone's thunder here. This is like as juiced as you will see in a men's MMA fight. Like this fight, I'm trying to find the number, but I think it's like minus 300 almost to go the
minus
distance.
350, bro.
Yeah, minus 350. That is a seriously high number in terms of going the distance. Not that I'm necessarily interested in betting the under per se, But certainly, I don't think you're fooling anyone by playing this fight or thinking this fight goes the distance. But John, I know you have a prop play on this matchup. Talk to me about what you got in Green versus Iaquinta.
Yeah, I think that's really the only way to play it is Green by decision is minus 115 on FanDuel. Well, I don't know if it's still available. That's what I bet. I actually played it for to win a unit and a half on FanDuel. That line was like minus 130 elsewhere in the market. I just think on a fight, like you said, minus 350 to hit the judges' scorecards, and we're getting minus 115 on Green by decision, who I think is the better striker. We've seen Iaquinta get outstruck multiple times, doesn't really move his head. Didn't look great the last time we saw him. Now coming off a 2-year layoff. Bobby Green also has upside to land a couple takedowns here. I think he can wrestle if he chooses to. The fight IQ is always a concern, but I think Bobby Green is the better minute winner here, even outside of the long layoff concerns for Iaquinta. I know he's always got like the dog in him to make it a competitive fight. And, Bobby Green is not someone that you want to lay juice with, but I think playing Green by decision is still the right move. And I'm showing some value on Green by decision at minus 115. So that's one of my bigger plays of the week. Bobby Green by decision. In terms of DraftKings, I probably won't have a ton of interest in this fight either way.
Yeah, I've learned not to doubt the John Kelly by decision props. There's a couple guys that I feel like every single time you play, like Cody Stamen, one of them.
Green by decision is an auto bet, especially in like matchups like this. Cody Stamen is up there. Casey Kenny's up there. Like there's a few where it's like every time they're on the card, you just bet them by decision and you move on.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention is essentially when you're betting a fighter to win by decision, you're parlaying the fight to go the distance and the money line, which if you look at some sharper books, is about plus 100 this week. Usually with props, they make you pay a little bit extra of a price. Obviously, John still likes the side at minus 115. I will say that FanDuel had the best price on the market by a good amount. So if you do agree with John there, like Bobby Green by decision, I see minus 130s, minus 140s out there. I think FanDuel and maybe MGM have minus 115. So I would get on that probably as soon as possible. Tajik, any action for you here in Bobby Green versus Iaquinta?
I never bet Bobby Green, and I'm going to continue this tradition of not betting him. I mean, so to me, the thing about it is that that's the guy who made it look competitive and lost actually on the paper to Thiago Moises, the guy who barely throws any volume. And although that's the thing, right? Although every metric wise, when you're looking in terms of striking, when you look in terms of wrestling, everything screamed Bobby. How can you bet him? After the Thiago Moises fight, he just has this tendency, making this fight competitive, right? I think Fiziev fight, it was close. He should have probably, walked away with the decision. There was a close fight, but at the bet, so I'm not betting Bobby here, and I would need some tremendous value, to get on to bet on Iaquinta, and the only way I could see him, and it's going to be a last moment decision if I want to bet him by split decision, which is on FanDuel at plus 1,000. I think that's a bet I would be interested in. Bobby has plenty of split decisions, so let's see how it goes. I know he's going to be talking. They're both probably going to be talking, and so we'll see, right? It's going to be a trash talk, and I don't know. Iaquinta will probably try to sell him the house, so we'll see which way it goes. So plus 1,000, I like it by split decision. I think it's an interesting bet.
Yeah, I do think it's an interesting way to play it. I mean, probably blindly betting stuff like that in every Bobby Green fight is just a plus expected value over the long term, just kind of due to the way he fights. Certainly a fight that I think offers more entertainment value than betting value. Let's move on to the main, I guess, what do we call it now? The featured prelim, is that what they call it here? Right before the main card begins, we got Alex Pereira making his UFC debut. It's only his 5th MMA fight. The guy's minus 240, $9.1 thousand. Kickboxer, famous for knocking out Israel Adesanya. He's 9.1K on DK, as I mentioned. He takes on Andreas Mikolaitis, the Greek fighter, is plus 205, $7.1 thousand here. And I haven't made a bet on this fight, and I'll go to you here first, Tajik, but there's something about fading a guy who's very, one-dimensional in terms of being a kickboxer with Pereira, who has one fight in MMA of recent memory, with a guy like Mikolaitis. I will say Mikolaitis does not inspire much confidence at plus 200, but I feel like he's got a well-rounded game, potentially well-rounded enough to make a bet here at plus 200. But I need someone to either talk me in or talk me out of it. So Tajik, I'll let you go first here. Any bet for you here in this prelim?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk you into betting Mikolaitis because I think I like him. Just because I think his game is more complete, And I think what's more important is that he is pretty durable, and I think he's been stopped a couple of times, but in his career, but these were like late into the third or fourth round stoppages, right? So overall, I think he can open a great opposition to Pereira, and Pereira's story reminds me of Gokhan Saki, like when he came back, oh, this guy's gonna go, or Mirko Krokop, but more so Gokhan Saki, right? Like more of a, this wrestler at the kickboxer coming at the late age to get the crack at the UFC. So but he's 34 years of age, right? And so he's not going to come anywhere near close to competing against Israel Adesanya. I think easy, at the top of his started, I think, his MMA heavily at the age of 28, so he had the time on his side. He's a very talented guy. So with Pereira, it's a little bit tough. He's one-dimensional. I don't know how, if Mikolaitis will try to take him down. I think he can hold him down even. He tried the takedown, I think, against KB Bular, and he no, it wasn't KB Bular.
He did get one. He got a single leg. Yeah.
Right. He did get it, and with Pereira, if he takes down Pereira, what is Pereira going to do? I mean, that's the problem, right? So his path to victory, resides in probably this first round KO. And I think what's more viable is that probably, because Mikolaitis doesn't push much pace, either it's gonna be, Mikolaitis by decision, and that's the bet that I will be considering.
Yeah, and John, we've got a couple of people in the chat saying that fight doesn't go the distance. Is a strong line. Obviously, it seems to be kind of a binary fight where if the fight stays on the feet, Pereira is likely to be the one leading the dance, potentially live for knockout if he gets to the ground. Potentially Mikolaitis is able to get a finish. I know Tajik goes the distance like some Mikolaitis prop. I will say that Mikolaitis has 4 KO losses on his record, but one of them is against Modestas Bukauskas, where he basically was fell into the cage wall. Those who know, I wouldn't say that was necessarily a KO that would make me doubt his durability moving forward, but probably one of the better strikers he's fought, even in an MMA setting. Do you have any action here in Pereira versus Mikolaitis, John?
I don't. And yeah, that was a weird stoppage, but it doesn't change the fact that he was really rocked at the end of that round. Yeah. Like he has been knocked out, like you said, 4 times on his record. I don't think he's maybe as durable as you guys do. I would favor fight doesn't go the distance, aside from taking a shot on Mikolaitis at the money line. Like, I get the concerns of Pereira, like his defensive, like we talked about the defensive grappling concerns of a couple other guys previously. Like, the defensive grappling concerns of Pereira is like, they're very big concerns. But I'm also not like, I don't know if I trust Mikolaitis enough to go for takedowns here. And to be successful in getting them. And if he does, yeah, obviously he's going to have an advantage there. I believe he's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And like we said, like, Pereira really has no sense of grappling. Like, the guy is a striker through and through, former Glory kickboxing world champion. The power's for real. This dude knocked out Dustin Jacoby with the left hook. Like, Jacoby, I think, has only been knocked out once in his MMA career. Historically pretty durable guy. Like, the power is certainly there against a guy who I think is going to be more willing to stand and trade with him, at least early in the fight, than he probably should. And I think he probably pays the price for it here. But this is another one where it's like, the way I see the fight playing out, the betting odds are just way too inflated for me to really even see it. So I think the best look is probably fight doesn't go, because if you do like the Mikolaitis side, maybe he implements the wrestling, and I think he has a clear advantage. I think he could submit Pereira if he does get the fight to the ground. And then obviously Pereira is live for the knockout if the fight plays out on the feet. So I think that's probably the best look here.
Yeah, so I started this segment with asking Tajik to talk me into betting Mikolaitis. I think he did a solid job. I have to admit, I was probably going to do it regardless of what he said, because I'm just kind of waiting on the line movement here with Mikolaitis, man. Like, I'm definitely going to bet this guy. Plus 210 now. Hasn't really been a lot of line movement throughout fight week, which is a little bit surprising to me. I kind of expected this fight to get some attention, but I suppose we got a big fight week with a few really massive fights towards the top of the bill, so this one's getting overlooked. But hopefully some people, maybe I'll tweet out like the Pereira knockout over Israel Adesanya and hope someone sees it and just bets their life savings on the guy, and we can get a better line on Mikolaitis. But man, what it really comes down to here is, first of all, I'll start by saying I don't think Mikolaitis is very good at all. Like his striking is very much super like wide when he comes into strike. It's just kind of a barrage of punches where he throws wild hooks, leaves himself open to be countered for sure. I don't think he's the most durable guy in the world. I actually think he's a pretty poor wrestler, but he was able to get the single leg on Kebu Bular, was able to transition to the back pretty nicely in that matchup. And I just think it's one of those things where like, I don't think Bahita is going to have much success in MMA. And I don't know how many times I'm going to get to fade him at a plus 200 price tag here. So I think plus 200 for Mikolaitis, like, the guy is capable of grappling. John, you said you don't know if he's going to wrestle. I DM'd him on Instagram. I told him to wrestle. So hopefully he'll listen to me this week. And I told him that he could take this guy down. The last time I did that was my girl, Abigail Montes, who beat Clarissa Shields. And honestly, this fight reminds me a little bit of that one because, like, honestly, if Clarissa Shields, like she won her PFL debut, for those who don't know, got dominated in the first 2 rounds, comes back, gets a KO victory in the third. If that happens here, I'll just fade Bahita his next time out. Like I think we could just kind of martingale fade this guy. I don't think he has what it takes to really win mid-level UFC fights. So I'll pick Mikolaitis. I don't think he's very good. I'll probably keep it to a unit, but I mean, there's not a ton of tape on Bahita, but you go back and watch his fights before his kind of his break from MMA. When he went back to kickboxing, like this guy's getting badly out grappled by super poor guys. And I know he has this knockout victory over Thomas Powell last year, about a year ago, but man, this guy was minus 700 was Bahita, minus 700 after not fighting MMA for 4 years leading up to that fight. Like that tells you about the level of competition he was facing. The guy's a losing record. We don't see that a ton in men's MMA, especially in promotions like LFA, which I actually have some respect for in terms of the strength of schedule. So long way of saying, I think a very good fighter is minus 220 here, and I'll take the other side for a unit. Let's move on to the main card here. We got Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler. Kicking it off, we got Gaethje as a minus 205 favorite. He's $8,900 on DK. Michael Chandler comes back coming off of a title fight loss to Charles do Bronx Oliveira. He's plus 185, 7.3K. John, I'll let you go first here. Both of these guys coming off of losses in title fights. The winner figures to have a shot to get another title fight following this one. Certainly some competition from guys like Beneil Dariush, Islam Makhachev in this division, but a big performance from either one of these guys could vault them straight back into a title fight. And it figures to be a highlight finish for whoever wins this fight. Severely favored to finish inside the distance. I'm expecting violence. I'm sure you are as well. What side do you like here in Gaethje versus Chandler?
Yeah, I mean, if Gaethje doesn't get a title shot after this knockout win, then we riot. You know, you heard him say it. I tend to agree. Like I'm all in Justin Gaethje this week. You know, and Michael Chandler, like I respect him a little bit more than others. You know, people out there calling him Tyron Woodley 2.0. Like I think that's pretty harsh. But I do favor Justin Gaethje here pretty significantly. I think he's just a much more diverse striker. You know, he has some of the nastiest leg kicks in the game. Obviously the power in his hands, but it's just the diversity in his strikes where I don't think Chandler has that diversity. And Chandler's a guy who we've seen been hurt with leg kicks before. And, you know, in a fight where I think both guys are going to stand and bang, I favor the durability of Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje is a guy who, you know, he's going in there like to fight to the death. Like Michael Chandler is not going in there to fight to the death. Like I think Justin Gaethje knocks him out here. I think it's pretty clear. FanDuel had a plus 100 when most other books had a minus 110. I played that for a unit and a half. I also took a half a unit stab at Justin Gaethje by knockout in round 2 at plus 650, which was also the best available at the market. Just because I could see this being like, you know, if Gaethje doesn't blow his load in the first round, but, you know, he gets Chandler's leg compromised a little bit in the first round, maybe wobbles him a little bit, then I don't think Chandler's making it out of round 2. So I think Justin Gaethje knocks him out inside one of the first 2 rounds. Obviously, in terms of DraftKings, like you could target either side because the winner is very clearly going to win by knockout in one of the first couple rounds, in my opinion. But I just really think it comes from the Justin Gaethje side. So you guys could tell me if I'm wrong here, but I played a unit and a half at plus 100 by knockout Justin Gaethje and half a unit Gaethje by knockout in round 2 at plus 650.
Yeah, I like that breakdown a lot. I'm on a similar side. Tajik, we'll go to you first. There's a comment here in the chat saying if Chandler shoots a takedown, I'm going to cry. I actually think that there's a decent chance that Chandler is going to come out here with a wrestling approach. You know, I think general consensus is they're going to stand and bang. And I do think that that's likely, but I'm not sure it'll be without a takedown effort from Michael Chandler. So are you kind of taking a Chandler wrestling approach into your analysis at all in this matchup?
I actually wouldn't, only because Chandler in his hooker fight, he could have taken the path of least resistance. I think Chandler is always, whether he's fighting or doing like embedded episode, he's always on a mission to prove a point. And I think when he went like with against Hooker, he made this point, and now he believes in his hands. So I think he will. Spend a lot of energy if he tries to take Gaethje down, and Gaethje's wrestling, defensive wrestling is top level. I don't, other than Khabib probably giving him trouble, I don't see how Chandler is gonna give him trouble. Even if he took him down, I don't think he's gonna be able to hold him down. There's nothing on the paper that shows that Chandler is able to do that. I think I think Gaethje stops him, but I wouldn't bet him. It's just for me, even plus money is not enough value for me to bet on Gaethje. I think a great point in terms of the DraftKings. You have to play either one of them here on the DraftKings side of things, and I will be hedging this fight. And so we'll see. I think I like Gaethje here. I like Gaethje to stop Chandler, and that would be my pick. But I don't see a bet here.
Yeah, I bet Justin Gaethje. I actually bet him on the money line at -162 to win a unit and a half. I believe it's my biggest bet on the card. I just feel pretty strongly here to echo John's sentiments. Like I think that they're mostly going to stand and bang. I wouldn't be surprised if Chandler tries to shoot a takedown. But to Tajik's point, I think that the market consensus on what Gaethje's grappling is certainly much lower than I think the reality is, right? Like people think because this guy got subbed by Khabib, and I will say like off his back, he looked, I don't want to say like a white belt because it's hard to compare someone to like the greatest MMA grappler that we've seen in Khabib Nurmagomedov, but like it certainly seemed like he wasn't super prepared to be able to work off his back. But in a spot like Michael Chandler, man, like I wouldn't be shocked if Chandler was able to submit him or whatever on the fight, if the fight got to the ground. But Gaethje's like a high-level wrestler in his own right. I kind of find it unlikely that Chandler's able to rack up much time in top position. And then on the feet, man, like before the Chandler versus Charles Oliveira fight, I talked about how Chandler doesn't deal with leg kicks well, and I thought that Charles Oliveira's striking was actually the better striker in that matchup. I thought his straight shots and leg kicks would give Chandler problems. I think I was partially right in that because obviously he got the knockout, but it wasn't without facing some adversity. But I kind of just think that's the Michael Chandler. That's what Michael Chandler is at this point, man. Like I'm not convinced that this guy is top 10 in the UFC. He's an exciting fighter with a strong skill set, hypothetically. But like he doesn't have a high fight IQ, as Tajik mentioned, doesn't take the path of least resistance often. He loves to stand and bang, doesn't have great durability. His offensive wrestling falls off a cliff when his cardio does. Like I just don't think that this guy is necessarily someone who I'd favor, certainly over Justin Gaethje, that's for sure, but over like probably at least 10 guys in the top 15. Like I've just never been a Michael Chandler guy. I bet against him in both of his UFC fights. I will continue that trend here. Just don't think he's good enough to hang with a guy like Justin Gaethje. I think Gaethje will hurt him to the leg early on and eventually put him out. So I'll call Justin Gaethje KO in round 1. It is my biggest bet and most kind of the most conviction I have behind a play on the card. I will hedge it a little bit on DK, but if you see me on the DK leaderboards, it is most likely with a lot of Justin Gaethje lineups this weekend. I think he's a super strong play in that regard. Anything else here to add on the people main event?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if you guys saw, somebody shared on Twitter, Michael Chandler was doing like a Ask Me Anything on Twitter or something like that. This was back in August. And after the fight got booked with Justin Gaethje, and somebody said, how do you plan on dealing with the leg kicks? And his response was, eat them. I'm like, yeah, good luck, buddy. Let me know how that goes for you on Saturday at Madison Square.
Yeah, John,
exactly.
and I wanted to say quickly. I think if Gaethje wins convincingly, this will effectively set up Gaethje versus Makhachev.
Yeah.
You think Makhachev
like a number 1 contenders fight?
I think it's an interesting plot. Yeah. I think it's.
I would love that matchup. I think I would love to see that just to see if Gaethje can kind of deal with some form of high level grappling that's not Khabib Nurmagomedov. But I would be surprised. I think if Gaethje knocks out Chandler, I would be shocked if they don't give him the title shot. But we'll see.
Yeah. We'll see. Tajik has been calling like all these matchups on Twitter. He could be a UFC matchmaker at this point. I will say, as a Justin Gaethje fan, first and foremost, I certainly hope that the Islam Makhachev fight is not next because I don't think it would look pretty for him. I think it's a tough matchup. I mentioned last week I'd favor Islam over anybody at 155 pounds. I think Gaethje especially is a matchup that I would expect him to win. Let's move on to the second fight of the main card here. We got two New York guys throwing it down. In the Big Apple, we got Shane Burgos, minus 190 at current market. He's $9,000 on DK. He takes on Billy Quarantillo, who has put together a nice little stretch here in the UFC, plus 165 as an underdog, priced as a dog yet again, I should say. He's $7,200 on DraftKings. I'll go first here. No action for me. I think this is a really interesting fight because normally I'm super high on Shane Burgos, right? Like, this guy is an analytical darling, really good takedown defense. His volume in terms of throwing strikes is extremely, I would say, like, extremely elite. Like, this guy throws about as much volume as anybody else. The biggest concern with him, as always, is he eats too many shots in return. You know, I think his kind of slipping and his high guard, or his lack of high guard, and his kind of tendency to more slip out of punches is something that actually, in terms of like the technical striking, and I will say, like, I'm not a technical striking analyst. Like, I'm not someone who pretends to know a ton about the ins and out of like the technicalities of the striking game, but he actually does avoid a lot of shots. The problem is the shots he does eat, he eats pretty flush because his hands are literally never up. Tajik mentioned earlier with Ian Gary, like, this kid needs to bring his hands up. Shane Burgos really never has his hands up, eats a lot of shots in return, despite the fact that I think his slipping ability is pretty solid. That's always the concern here. But with Billy Quarantillo, this is a guy who I bet against him pretty big. I think I max bet Gabriel Benitez against him his last time out, had a ton of CLV, and that bet was just kind of dead on arrival. Like, I was wrong. I thought Benitez would clearly outstrike him, and it turned out to be the opposite. Obviously, Quarantillo rocked him early. That probably affected the rest of the fight. But like, Billy Q, I think, hits a little bit harder than I previously gave him credit for. Striking is a little bit better, but I think he's going to need to take down Shane Burgos in order to win this fight. I think that's where he'll have the majority of his success, and I just don't see him having a ton of top control time. Burgos, pretty good takedown defense, really good scrambler, doesn't spend a ton of time stuck on his back. So I know a few people think that Billy Q is live this weekend. Potentially one of you two thinks that, but for me, it's a pass. I will pick Burgos, but I think this is an exciting fight. I kind of wanted to play the under, but it feels like a fight that is just going to be so fast-paced with so many action moments, but we never see a finish materialize. Obviously, Burgos is coming off a scary KO, potentially some long-term durability issues on the horizon for him. But yeah, I'm happy to sit back and watch this one play out. Tajik, anything for you here in Burgos versus Quarantillo?
Yeah, I took a shot at Billy Q by decision at plus 380. I think it's going to be a closely contested fight. I just see that, in terms of the stand-up, it could be pretty close. And then with Billy Q having an advantage, in terms of wrestling, being trying to seek the takedowns and grapple more proactively, I think he has simply more ways to win this fight. And although we have to give the credence to the fact that he's gonna Shane Burgos is gonna put the volume on him, and it's gonna be pretty significant. I think he has a highest striking output in his division. So it's definitely it's definitely a risk factor when you are betting Billy Q. But I think I like him. I think he can cruise here and get the decision. And even by unanimous decision, I think you can get the better odds over on DraftKings. But yeah, so my bet was here, Billy Q by decision, and then I will be also considering him betting by unanimous decision, maybe closer to the fight day.
Yeah, so a dog shot here for Tajik. First of all, shout out to DK. They've been putting out a lot of kind of unique MMA lines that we haven't always had here in the States. And I'm not one to shout out books often, but DK's done a really strong job with their MMA prop offering. So I like all those props that you mentioned, not necessarily in terms of in this matchup, but it's nice that they're offering them throughout the entire card. John, I think you are joining Tajik, and it will leave me on an island here. Talk to me about your bet in this fight on Billy Quarantillo.
Yeah, happy to see that we're on the same page here. That gives me a little more confidence on Billy Q. I played him at the money line at plus 170. I considered chasing a decision prop, but I also was like, I kind of torn because Billy Q is like, he's kind of more of a finisher, and Burgos coming off like Burgos. It pains me to go against Shane Burgos because he's like one of my guys, but really, and it's not just the last fight where we saw the delayed knockout against Edson Barbosa. Obviously, that was super concerning, but it's like what Jonah talked about. Like Shane Burgos, since he came into the UFC, like he's always been a guy who's willing to eat one punch to give you two punches in return. And it's just like the chin cannot handle it anymore. Like even early on when he had good durability, he was still getting chin checked. Like he was getting dropped. Like he wasn't like rocked ever, but he would get dropped and then step back up and, go back to it. But we saw him knocked out in the Calvin Kattar fight. That was a pretty vicious knockout. Then we saw the delayed knockout against Edson Barbosa, where it was like his brain was just like, I can't take these punches anymore. Like, that's super concerning. It wasn't that long ago. Now he's going up against somebody who does hit pretty hard in Billy Quarantillo, who can possibly match his pace. Like, Quarantillo's striking is underrated. Like you mentioned, what was it? The who's your boy that I always bust your balls about betting? Benitez, Gabriel Benitez. Like, nobody was expecting him to outstrike Benitez. I don't think. Like, we weren't expecting that.
I certainly wasn't.
Like, I like Billy Q. That surprised me. Like, I think that was one of his best performances. If he comes out and looks like that, like, is competitive in the striking, can match the pace of Shane Burgos, is not just willing to accept the back foot and just eat these powerful shots from Burgos, and then maybe mix in the wrestling as well. Why isn't he live to win rounds here? Why isn't he live to win a decision like TajikBay, or even test the chin of Burgos, who now we maybe have some durability concerns about? So I think at plus 170, I think it's worth a play. I played him for a unit on DraftKings at plus 170, and I think this is another good fight to target, because if Burgos' durability does hold up, we know he's powerful to test the durability of Quarantillo, or at least keep up a high enough volume to where maybe he lands a ton of strikes and gets a knockdown to where he can pay off his salary as well. So I think it's a pretty solid fight to target, but definitely going to be more exposed to the underdog in Billy Q.
Yeah, I might. You guys might be slowly but surely talking me into a bet here on the under. I see a plus 106. I wish I could just bet, like we mentioned, the prop markets on DraftKings. I wish I could bet like over total significant strikes combined, like over 175, because I'm so sure that there's going to be so much output in this fight. I don't know if it materializes in a finish, but plus money is pretty tempting. Obviously, both of you guys are on Billy Q in this spot. Shout out to Narco, who hopped on the show last week in John's absence. Nice to see him in the chat. Did a great job. Hope to have him on soon. We got 3 more fights left to go here. We got the 2 title fights, but before those get started, we got Marlon Chito Vera minus 145. He's 8.8K against Frankie the Answer Edgar, plus 125 for Frankie, 7.4K on DraftKings. Frankie fighting in New York is kind of a one of those MMA myths you hear about in terms of guys in certain conditions. He's historically fought pretty well in the tri-state area, comes in as an underdog, coming off of a pretty brutal knockout loss to Corey Sandhagen. Seems to be a lot of market love for Frankie this week. Despite that, Frankie came into the week like a plus 140, plus 150 dog. I now see him at plus 125. Betway is a stray plus 150 if those for those who have access there, but certainly a lot of money is coming on Frankie Edgar this week. And John, if I'm not mistaken, you are one of the people that has, we'll give you credit. We'll say that you have led to some of the line movement in this spot. I know you're on Frankie Edgar here as an underdog. Talk me through the play.
Yeah, I don't think I was part of the line movement because I didn't bet him at the money line. So I'm not going to take credit there. I actually chased the decision prop at plus 260, I believe was what FanDuel had. And I think that's just a really good number. Other places had it at like plus 220 at the open or something like that. But this is just a spot where, we talk about this time and time again, where I'm almost always going to take the guy who I think has at least a pretty good chance to land takedowns and earn top position. Like maybe it's a leak in my game, but I always favor the wrestlers when I doubt that the guy that they're facing could defend takedowns, or like in this case, Chito Vera is willing to accept the takedowns and play off his back. So I think there's a pretty good chance that Edgar earns some top time here. Along with that, we know Chito Vera is notoriously a slow starter. I think Frankie Edgar probably wins round 1 here at a pretty decent clip. And then if he's willing to, Frankie Edgar, I think his striking is underrated. This is what I think is a buy low spot, coming off the knockout against Corey Sandhagen. Frankie, even at 40 years old, like Jonah, as well as anybody, like I'm almost never betting 40-year-olds. And this is just a spot where I think he could, at the very least, keep it competitive in the striking. And then I think he could land a couple takedowns here. If we think he wins round 1 at a pretty decent clip, I think he can probably win round 2 at a pretty decent clip here. And, he's always been a guy that the judges respect a little bit. I just think this is a pretty good spot for him here. I don't hate the money line play, but it's probably moved a little bit too far in his direction to play it now. But the decision prop, I think, is certainly live because Cheeto's never been finished. I doubt Frankie's the one to finish him. And on the flip side, you're really just kind of fading Vera finish. If you played fight goes the distance, I think that was a decent look. And Edgar's never been submitted. So even if he lands takedowns here, I know Cheeto's a black belt. He likes to play off his back, but Edgar's never been submitted. I think he stays safe on top and hopefully gets the judge's nod here and cashes that decision prop.
Yeah, so Jon here on Frankie by decision. Tajik, anything for you here in our the featured bout on the main card?
Yeah, I'm interested in betting actually Vera by decision, but I want a little bit better odds. I think is currently at what, plus 195. I want to get at least plus 200 on him, and I'm going to be waiting until more action comes in on Frankie. The thing about Frankie, I think, which is problematic, is that his wrestling and grappling efficiency has not improved even with him going down the weight division, and I think it's problematic when it comes to fighting Vera, because Vera will be there. His output is there. He hits hard, and I think just if takedowns don't materialize, for Frankie, which is probably likely to happen, then standing up, it's going to be problematic for his passes will be limited, and so in that regard, I think Vera could be a bad play. I actually have for whatever reason a great deal of confidence that Vera takes this one by decision. I'm not betting him by unanimous decision here only because his first round, like Jon said, is very close. He's warming up in the first and normally loses. But I do believe that he takes the decision here, and he will take it comfortably here. I'm just waiting for a better odds to come through, and I think at plus 200, I'll be willing to make a bet on him.
Yeah, I'm glad someone agrees with me this week, Tajik, because it feels like everybody, the mother, is on the Frankie Edgar side. Certainly the market coming in on that side. Man, I like Cheeto Vera a little bit in this spot. I'm not sure I'm going to bet him, although the market is into a price that I would consider betting him. I understand the thought process behind the Frankie Edgar play. Cheeto historically goes for kind of low percentage outcome submissions, right? Like a pull guillotine, like Jon mentioned, ends on his back, is a slow starter. Frankie Edgar, historically not much of a slow starter himself, is pretty likely, I would think, to come out to a small lead here. One thing I want to note, I think a live betting opportunity on Cheeto Vera will almost 100% present itself after the first round in this matchup, assuming that Edgar isn't completely washed and gets knocked out in the first round. I do think a live betting opportunity is certainly something to keep an eye on here. I won't be able to make it myself, but I do think that that's a spot I really want to look at. The one thing that I think is a little bit flawed behind the Frankie Edgar play is, man, he's not always gone to this wrestling game of late. The last time we really saw him go out there and put a concerned effort trying to take guys down, and he had success doing it, I will say, is Yair Rodriguez. That fight was in 2017. He's gone, 6-7 fights since then, where he hasn't really gone to the wrestling consistently. And of course, he was knocked out by Korean Zombie relatively quickly in their fight. Corey Sandhagen, he barely had time to throw a strike. Max Holloway is historically one of the best counter wrestlers and volume strikers in MMA history. These have not been easy matchups. But man, I don't think Marlon Vera is an easy matchup either. And this might be a rudimentary thinking. It might just be kind of underthinking the fight. But at some point, it becomes a cage fight. And in his prime, man, Frankie Edgar, obviously someone who pushed a rapid pace, super tough guy to get out of there. But at 40 years old, I just feel like Cheeto is so much more violent, if that makes sense. I just think that Cheeto is so much more of a damaging fighter at this point in his career. Yeah, Edgar has a chance to get a little bit of top control time. And I don't even think Edgar is a bad striker. It just feels to me like Cheeto, pound for pound, top 10 most violent dudes in the UFC, and he's facing a 40-year-old this weekend. I think I'm not buying low here on Frankie. I think that Marlon gets the job done. Wasn't going to bet him at minus 160, minus 170, but the price is coming a little bit. Certainly a spot where I'm kind of planting my flag on the podcast. So maybe I need to put my money where my mouth is and get on the Cheeto Vera train. One thing I wanted to touch on before we get the two title fights is Maddie in the chat said it's very chalky, but Cheeto finish only market, which is on DraftKings. I mentioned they've got a lot of prop offerings at minus 250 is a solid look. I agree with that. And I also think if you're betting Frankie Edgar, he's an underdog in the decision only market. I would prefer to bet him there as opposed to betting him by decision or on the money line. That is a market where if either guy finishes the fight, which I really don't think Frankie's going to finish the fight, if either guy finishes the fight, your bet is void and it only pays out win or loss going to decision. I think that Frankie probably has close to a 50% chance to win decision here. I just think that Marlon doesn't let it get that far. So I'll pick Cheeto Vera. I think he wins inside the distance. We'll call it round 2. And I might be looking to bet him as the week goes on. All right, let's move on to the co-main event here. We got a rematch for the strawweight title. We got Rose Namajunas defending her belt currently as an underdog in the betting market. She's plus 100, also the less expensive fighter on DraftKings at 8K this weekend. She takes on Zhang, obviously former champion. She's 8K. I actually got that backwards. So Rose is 8.2K on DraftKings. Zhang is 8K flat on DK despite being the favorite at minus 120. We all know what happened when they fought earlier this year. Rose Namajunas turned the lights out in the first round, became champion of the world once again. But however, betting odds were in that fight were closer to Zhang minus 200. Rose has garnered some respect in the market, still a betting underdog this weekend. Tajik, any action for you here in the main event? I think it's an interesting one. We didn't really get to see this fight play out too long the first time around. So hopefully, at least as a fan's point of view, hopefully we see it get extended a little bit this weekend.
Yes, I would like it actually to get extended, and I think Weili actually has a good opportunity here. I don't put much weight behind the first fight. When Weili got stopped. To be honest, it doesn't mean anything to me. It only stipulates the point that Rose is one of the most lethal in her division. I mean, she has nearly a one knockdown in every fight. But I think for Weili, the plan has to be to try to clinch with Rose, trying to make her tired, dirty boxing, potentially take her down. I don't know if she's able, but that's what she's been doing in her fight camp. And so it's a close matchup, and I actually bet Zhang by decision at plus 280. So for me, that was pretty interesting. I thought there's a lot of value there, and I think it's pretty interesting bet. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but I like Weili here, and I think she cruises here. So that should be an interesting fight, and yeah, that's my take on it.
So you bet the goes the distance. That was your play here, Tajik?
I bet Weili Zhang by decision.
Okay. Weili by decision. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
John, from what I understand, you are on the other side here. I'll let you two hash it out. It looks like you bet Rose Namajunas for multiple units. Talk to me about the thesis behind the play, if you will.
Yeah, this is kind of a no-brainer for me. I bet Rose at plus 105 for 2 units is my biggest play on the card. I just think she's got Weili covered. She's the better technical striker. If the fight plays out at range, I definitely favor Rose there. If Zhang maybe comes in with the wrestle heavy game plan after training with Henry Cejudo for a couple months, like even if she lands takedowns, I think she might be at risk at getting submitted. Like the biggest concern with Rose has always been the mentality. And that's really the only reason why I was kind of gun shy on her the last time around, where I kind of went back and forth. And I did end up betting Rose untracked, like it was late on a Saturday, so I didn't end up tracking it anywhere at like plus 165 or whatever. But this time, I feel pretty good that like outside of something crazy, like I really just think she's the better fighter, and I disagree with the line movement here that Weili is favored. I really don't understand it. Like, and it's nothing against Weili. Like obviously, I think we see a competitive fight here. But I just think Rose is the better striker. I think she's the better grappler. I think Weili really has to do something to really just kind of, I don't know if she has to like finish Rose per se, but like in order to win 3 of these 5 rounds, like she's going to have to do something pretty convincingly. And I don't really think it's going to be like, oh, she just comes in and takes her down like 6 times. Like if she does, hand up, I predicted it wrong. I was wrong, whatever. But I think Rose is worth at least a 1 unit play here. I don't understand the plus money. So I like Thug Rose to get it done this week. And I think she defends the belt.
Yeah, I wish I could settle the score here. I will just wish both of you gentlemen good luck. And
get off the fence. Get off the fence.
I'll let the 2 women hash it out. Man, I don't think I'm going to bet this fight. I will say I'll pick
Rose. You got
Rose.
a Thug Rose poster in your background. Come on now.
I'll probably be wearing my Thug Rose shirt. What I might do is I might have some like untracked Trevor Whitman parlays. I think the Gaethje, Rose, Kamaru Usman parlays, maybe something like that. Maybe I'll rock my Elevation Fight Team shirt, even though they're not technically there. They just train with that group. But in all seriousness, in this fight, I kind of like the under at first glance. I thought in the first fight that Rose clearly – Tajik mentioned it. She's one of the most lethal fighters in this weight class. And I don't think it's because she has like the craziest power or, it's like the best all around finisher in the weight class. She's just very precise. She picks her spots. She puts up good volume early on in fights. And I just think that she has the ability to finish a lot of these fights. But I think that we are not maybe giving enough credence to the narrative coming into the first fight was that Weili might struggle, or I should say Rose might struggle down the stretch of this fight. Like Rose is historically a very fast starter. She's like the anti-Cheeto Vera, if you will, comes out bouncing on her toes, always has a really strong first round. But we've seen her in longer fights, even like round 3 against Jessica Andrade in their second fight. Rose really slowed down in that matchup, took a pretty lethal beating in that spot. I think that in order for Zhang to win, the fight needs to get extended here. And I kind of just think she might be able to outmuscle Rose down the stretch. I'm picking Rose because I do think she's the better grappler. And I think she's the better technical striker early on in the matchup. But I do think there's a little bit of this cardio dynamic where Rose, her striking is just not even so high effort. It's just the way she moves in and out with so much footwork is taxing, even though it doesn't necessarily look like she's doing all that much in terms of like putting out a ton of effort. I think she might slow down a little bit. I think that Rose sub is live should this fight get to the ground. I do think she's a better submission grappler than Zhang, but like if Zhang is able to get this fight into the clinch in rounds 4 and 5, I kind of expect her to be able to bully Rose a little bit just in terms of the pure strength. So I'll pick Rose. I'm not sure I'm going to get there to bet her. Like the under a little bit early, but I don't know. I've kind of cooled on it a little bit throughout the week. So one of us has to be right. I'm passing. John's on Rose. Tajik's on Zhang. Anything from either of you men before we move on here to the main event?
I was just going to say, this is once again another good fight to target. Obviously, we have the 5 rounds here, but these are fighters that we know put on a really strong pace. Like, so in terms of DraftKings, this is another one that you probably need to have circled come Saturday.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought that up, John, because last week on the show and in my DFS article on FTN Daily, I mentioned that the Piotr Jan versus Corey Sandhagen fight was the one to stack in terms of cash games. I think that stack might have even won a GPP. I don't know on a 14-fight slate how repeatable it is for a stack to win a GPP. I will say if you're a cash game player in the head-to-head lobby, 50-50s, double-ups, I think this is the title fight that you want to target both sides of. Should be a competitive fight. Hopefully it goes longer than 30 seconds this time. Obviously, you lock in a win from one side unless the draw hits or something like that. But at $8K a piece, I guess you're paying, 16.2K for a win and quite possibly 5 rounds of volume from pretty high output strikers. So I think that this is the title fight you want to target as opposed to the main event, which we will get to now. For the welterweight strap, we got a rematch between Kamaru Usman, the defending champion. He is minus 300 against Colby Chaos Covington, comes back plus 250 for Colby as the underdog here. Obviously, we all know what happened in their first fight. Competitive fight, close scorecards. Kamaru kind of pulls away down the stretch, gets a stoppage victory in the 5th round. He's being priced as a bigger favorite in this spot than he was in their first fight. And I think part of that is fair, right? Like at this point, he's kind of established himself, in my opinion, as the best pound for pound fighter on the planet. But at the same time, we saw a very competitive fight considering the odds in the first time around. So certainly a fight I'm looking forward to. I know everyone has a lot of hot takes on it. I won't waste too much time setting it up. John, I'll let you go first here for the title fight between Usman and Covington. Any action for you, my friend?
Yeah, no action as of now. I did kind of make a surprise face there because you said about the Wang Li fight and the Zhang Weili. I had that backwards. And Rose Namajunas fight that you'd stack that over possibly the main event. The last time these guys fought, that was the optimal, was stacking this fight just because, go ahead.
But Colby didn't even score that. Colby scored like 50. That's more because no underdogs lost. I think that underdogs are live in this spot.
Colby scored like 80 or 90 on this fight. They landed like 200 significant strikes.
I'll pull it up, but I think he landed 143 significant strikes and scored like 57 points. But regardless, I'll let you back to it. I'll pull it up.
Yeah, you might want to fact check that because I'm pretty sure that was the optimal, and I think they scored a shit ton of points. But this is one where I know Colby said he was planning on maybe wrestling here. I'm not buying it. Like, even if he does try to wrestle, like, nobody's ever taken down Kamaru Usman. And if he does, like, he's just going to expend extra energy here. So we see it time and time again when both guys have, like, a wrestling base, it just turns into a boxing match. We saw that in the first fight. And in a striking match, like, I do favor Kamaru Usman. He was the better striker the first time around. Since then, he's made more improvements than Colby Covington. The evolution of his striking, I think, is super clear. I think his jab, he has one of the best jabs in the UFC. Like, I just think he's a much better striker than Colby. I don't think Colby can wrestle him here. Even though the fight was close the first time they fought, I think Usman's made more improvements since then. So even though it's like, should Colby be plus 250? Probably not. But I also think he doesn't really have much of a chance to win this fight. So I like Usman here. I'm on the Usman side. I'm going to be pretty heavy on Usman in terms of DraftKings. Obviously, it's a fight that you can target either sides. I know a lot of people out there are on Covington, and at plus 250, like, obviously I don't hate the underdog shot. It's just that I think Usman defends the belt again. I don't think Colby's the guy to beat him. So let me know what you guys think here.
Well, first of all, shout out to me for being right. 57 points for Colby in their first fight. He landed 143.
What am I smoking?
I don't know, man.
What fight is that where Colby scored like 90 in a loss? What am I thinking of?
Where Colby hasn't like lost at, like he lost like Alves by 7 round 1. Like, I think you're just like confusing him with someone else, to be honest. He landed 143 strikes, all significant, did nothing else in the fight. In the old DK scoring, where it was more per significant strike, he scored, I just did the math, 71.5. So it's possible that it was optimal. You know, I won't remember. I don't remember whether it was optimal because of like.
Okay. So it was 70, not 57. Okay.
Well, no,
that makes more sense now.
He scored 57 now with the current, like, because the way the scoring
changed. But when it was the old, it was 70 something. Okay, that makes more sense.
He scored 70, but I still think, like, I don't know, I guess 7, like, it's hard to put up 70 now in a loss, I guess is my point. Although I guess Corey Sandhagen kind of did last week, but that's enough on the fight from 2 years ago in the DK scoring. Glad we got that figured out. Tajik, any action for you here in the main event?
Not as of yet. It's interesting matchup. I think if you're betting Colby, by decision at plus 500, I think it's an interesting bet. I understand why you would do that. When I was watching their first fight, I had Colby winning 3 rounds to 1, or it was 2-2, but it was close. I think it's tough. I like where Kamaru is mentally for this matchup, to be honest with you. He's all smiles, he's shoving Colby and talking trash. And when he was asked in the interviews, I think he gave Colby a credit, saying he's one of the welterweights, top fighters, and I think that fact that he comes in a very different state of mind prior to than he was in the first match. I think in the first match, Colby was, in his head, and I think in this fight it's vice versa. I'm not a psychologist or body language expert, but I think Kamaru is a deserved favorite here, but it's getting, the line is getting a little bit too crazy. I'm not betting definitely Usman at these odds. And so I would be interesting to see is the Usman by decision. I think this would be an interesting bet to make, but I need a little bit of a better value than where it currently is. So yeah, we'll see. I think my official prediction is going to be Usman by decision.
Yeah, so I'll round out the predictions here. I think this fight is the handicap. As much data as we have on these two fighters, I think so much of it comes down to how much has Colby Covington improved since their first fight? Because we know on paper, not even on paper, like we've seen it with our own eyes, Kamaru Usman go out there and he's putting guys to sleep. His jab is clearly much improved. He's always had a good jab, always had a straight 2 down the pipe, but like his striking is clearly leveled up. I don't think that's like some narrative, some recency bias. Like the guy is clearly getting better, best pound for pound fighter on the planet by a wide margin, in my opinion. Now, the only time we've seen Colby since that fight, what was it, 2 years ago at this point almost, was against Tyron Woodley. And honestly, like it was a Tyron Woodley that was well past his prime and a matchup that I always think probably would have boded well for Colby Covington. I wish we got that fight, wish we got a line on that before it was the end of Woodley's career. I think Colby would have beaten him kind of at any point. So for me, it just kind of comes down to, look, if Colby hasn't made significant improvements, like he was already outgunned in the power department a little bit in the first matchup. Like he hit Usman a good amount, but Usman is just so like such a cheat code in terms of his durability. I think that you can make the case for like Usman minus 400, minus 500. Obviously, I expect that Colby's made some sort of improvements here. I'm not laying minus 300. I think that Colby Covington is, as like controversial a figure as he is, he's just way too good a fighter to really feel comfortable laying a minus 300 price tag against. Like Colby is suffocating pace, really great volume. The problem is that Usman is able to keep up with that, and I think has a striking and power advantage. So I've never picked against Kamaru Usman. I doubt I will. So I'll pick him in this spot. I do think there's probably no value on the betting market, but I've seen a lot of people, man, like picking Usman, but saying that like the line might be wide. Like I think the line is right, man. Like Kamaru Usman, prove it to me, Colby, that you've made improvements to give yourself better than 25% chance to win this fight. I do think that Usman wins. I thought the over 2.5, like minus 130 on the openers was solid. Didn't really have enough places open where I was able to get down on it comfortably, and didn't get to a spot where I was able to do enough tape to like really get strongly behind the play. So no action for me. That line has moved to like minus 180. I'm just going to sit back, enjoy the fight. I think it should be a competitive matchup, competitive to the point where you don't want to lay minus 300, but also kind of we'll see the better fighter pretty clearly. I do expect to be Kamaru Usman throughout the fight. So we did it. That's 14 fights for UFC 268 going down this Saturday at the world's most famous arena in Madison Square Garden. Tajik, my friend, thank you for coming on the show. I want to give you this time before I kick it over to Jon to take us out of here on the close. I want to give you a second to plug your Twitter, whatever else you want to. I know you got a t-shirt out right now, so talk to the people about where they can find you and all that stuff.
First of all, Jon and Jonah, thanks for having me on the show. I think it was a great show. And you can find me on Twitter, and so I'm available at TajikBay. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Great being on your show again, and let's do it again sometime in the future.
Jon, feel free to take us out. I got nothing else to add. Tajik, plug your t-shirt. Don't you have a t-shirt out right now?
Yeah, no, I want to be humble. If I support the MMA community, so what I offer is my picks, DFS, and betting wise. So if you're buying my T-shirt, I support the MMA community with donations, and I support MMA content creators. It's available at bonfire.com/TajikBay. If you go to my Twitter, the link is in my description. And so, yeah, I always feel that it's important to support content creators, and because I know how hard it is, like just in general, to make this type of content. And so if you're interested, go buy. If not, just reach out to me, and I'll give you my picks, whatever you need. So yeah, I appreciate you just to give me the props. That's very kind of you.
There's the proper plug right there. All right, Jon Kelly, my man, take us out of here.
So if you don't already, the Twitter the Twitter tag is in the video here. If you're watching, everyone go follow TajikBay at TajikBay on Twitter. You probably won't get the illustrious follow back, but that's okay. Follow him anyway, and then obviously follow me and Jonah as well. If for whatever reason you don't, if you made it this far and you didn't hate the video, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I definitely appreciate it. I'm Jon Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman and TajikBay. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time.